Welcome back to the Aubergine Chef. Now this is part 3 of our holiday gift giving guide. Today we'll be making handmade gifts. 2 days ago I released an episode or the gift giving guide for 10 essential items for budding pastry chefs. Yesterday I released the gift giving guide for hidden treasures that I found online and in stores and stuff like that. And today we'll be making handcrafted gifts as some of my fans have suggested that I do. Now I'm not super crafty, so it was important to find super easy things to do, and they also wanted it to be kid friendly. So something that little kids can help in, not necessarily every step of the way, but something that they can help with, something that's not super dangerous or doesn't require a lot of skill, which is great because again, I'm not super crafty, so I don't have a lot of skill. So today I have with me my intern / assistant, or my friend, Victoria King. Her parents are the founders of Imagine Design, which is a design firm to help me give my website a new facelift, help me design, or they actually did design my logo and my banner and stuff like that. So they've been a tremendous help to me. They've become really close friends really quickly, and so I asked them if Victoria would like to come on and make some of the ornaments that we'll be making, so that way she could take some of them home later. So they said absolutely. So here we are. So we're going to do a couple different things. Now, there's a couple ideas that you can do that we're not going to do today. You can make gingerbread houses, of course, with kids. They make great gifts because the kids really feel like they helped out, which is important because kids don't really have a lot of money, so they can't really purchase anything to help out. But by making something like a gingerbread house, and it feels like it's a lot, because they put so much effort and time into it, it really feels valuable to them. So I have an episode on how to make gingerbread houses from a year or two ago when I did it with my niece and my nephew. It's a fun little episode. It's kind of silly, not super serious, but it gives you a decent, solid recipe on how to work with it, and you get to meet my family from California. Actually, they're out in Okinawa right now. Another idea is to make jar mixes. What you can do is take some of your cookie recipes and layer in the ingredients depending on how the recipe goes. Now, for example, if it's a creaming method, you want to make sure to end with sugar on top, so that way someone can scrape off the sugar in the jar and pour it into with the butter, and then have the dry ingredients underneath. So it's a pretty easy thing to do. There's a lot of jar recipes on Pinterest, there's a lot of jar ideas on Pinterest, so I'm not really going to go into it because it's just a very easy thing to do, very widely known. We're going to do a couple other recipes that I found on Pinterest today. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to work on they call it clay because it's not really clay, but it's the closest thing we're going to get to clay in the kitchen. It's like a clay dough ornaments. So over here we already have some of it made. It's still cooling off, and it's very soft, almost like mashed potatoes, I guess saying. It's kind of tough. So what we're going to do is we made blue, we made white, and now we're going to make green. We were going to make red, but we ran out of baking soda. So in the pot that Victoria is stirring, we have 1/2 cup of cornstarch, or 2 1/8 ounces, 1 cup of baking soda, or 9 5/8 ounces. So keep in mind that if you're using these little boxes, that you're going to need at least 2 if you're going to do 2 batches of the dough, and 3/4 cup of water, 6 ounces, and some food coloring. And that's it. It's just a slurry mix. You'll see it when we move over to the stove, and that's pretty much all we need to get ready for the dough. Meanwhile, if you're going to make the air fresheners at the same time, like we are, you're going to go ahead and get some of that stuff ready because it does need a second to set up. So in this small pot, I have 3 tablespoons of salt, or 2 ounces of salt, with 8 ounces of water, and I also stirred in 1 ounce or 4 of those packages of gelatin. And you can usually find unflavored gelatin in the Jell-O section. This is the Knox brand gelatin, but you can also get it at baking supply stores in a much bigger format. Usually gelatin, you can also find gelatin in health food stores. It's also sold as a supplement, like a protein supplement. They want you to stir it into your cereal or something like that, which sounds awful, but that's what they do apparently. I guess it has a lot of collagen and stuff like that. Anyway, and then in this bowl, you want to have 8 ounces of cold water, 1 ounce of vodka. If you don't use vodka, feel free to add more salt or some other kind of antiseptic kind of thing, because what you're using the vodka for is to prevent the mold from forming. Now, it's not a huge boon because it will mold eventually. This recipe just happens to mold eventually, especially if it's a very moist habitat. But the salt plus the vodka helps deter mold for at least 2 weeks, sometimes a whole month. And then you also want to put your fragrance oils in. Now, I'm using essential oils, which are derived from the plants. They're all natural, and they're a little bit more expensive depending on which one you get. Usually eucalyptus is the cheapest. I have pine. It was $8 for 1/2 ounce. And I also have peppermint, which was a little bit over $8 for 1/2 ounce. So it's kind of expensive. And what you want to do is you want to pour in the water, the vodka, in this bowl, and you want to pour in your essential oils too. For this one, for a little more of a Christmassy kind of feel, holiday kind of feel, I did 45 drops of pine and 15 drops of peppermint oil. Now, you can adjust that depending on the size of your room. If your room is bigger, you might want to use more drops. If it's smaller, you can use less drops. The recipe that I found on Pinterest recommended 30 drops, but I've noticed that it doesn't really fill the room with fragrance if it's a larger room. So we'll get to that afterwards. So what you want to do is you want to get your gelatin, the 8 ounces of water, and the 3 tablespoons or 2 ounces of salt in the pot and let it set up, because the gelatin does need to absorb and does need to hydrate from the gelatin or from the water before we can use it. So while that's hydrating, we're going to go ahead and work on the dough. All right, so as you can see, the cornstarch, baking soda, and water food coloring mixture is just a slurry right now. And what we're doing is we're warming it up over medium heat on the stove, and then when it starts to look like smooth, like mashed potatoes, which is going to happen pretty quickly, then we'll take it off. All right, so you can see that it's starting to thicken up. It's going to happen in chunks at first. It's not going to happen all at once. But just keep stirring it carefully, making sure it doesn't burn on the bottom. There's a lot of water, and cornstarch doesn't burn very easily, so you don't have to worry about that. But you do want to keep an eye on it. Again, you want to do this over medium heat, not high heat, so that way you can control it. I've also got the gelatin on the stove now. It's ballooned, as you can see. Usually it gets a little bit more sponge-like, but I've already started heating it up to start melting it down. We want it to be fully liquid before we use it. So I've already got that going on a very low heat because I don't want to boil the gelatin, because if you boil the gelatin, the proteins will denature and they won't gel up. All right, as you can see, it's getting nice and thick like mashed potatoes. We want to make sure that there's no loose parts before we remove it from the heat. It should thicken up pretty quickly. So you can see that it's very thick and mashed potato-like. All right, bring it over to the bowl. All right, then you want to immediately transfer it over to a bowl to cool off, and then cover it with a damp paper towel. All right, so while that dough cools off, we're going to go ahead and work on our homemade air fresheners. Again, a recipe I found on Pinterest. Now, I've already went over the ingredients with you, but I forgot to mention that if you're not able to use gelatin for any reason, you can use something called agar-agar. 28.8 grams of gelatin, which is 1 ounce of gelatin, is equal to 8 grams of agar-agar. All right, here's a closer look at the essential oils that I'm using. You can get these at Whole Foods, health food markets, sometimes craft stores. Now, again, essential oils are all natural. But there's also something called fragrance or scented oils, and those are artificial. So sometimes it bothers people's allergies, sometimes it gives people's headaches because it's just not a very natural smell. These are just really good smelling, they're really natural. So I recommend springing for it if you can afford it, and they last a while. I mean, we use 45 drops, but the air fresheners last to at least 2 weeks. So you get a lot of bang out of it for your buck. Before we do that, I want to mention that we did put the essential oils in this bowl before we put, not on the stove, because essential oils can break down from heat, and this helps prevent that a little bit. It's not a super, best way of doing, because we should cool down all the way, but it's a little bit faster if we do it this way. Thank you. So as you can see, the gelatin is all liquid, all dissolved, thanks to Victoria. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and add this to our mixture. Okay, go ahead and give that a good stir. Make sure to scrape it well, because remember, we dissolved the salt in there. We want to make sure the salt doesn't collect at the bottom as best as we can. And then you can add a few drops of food coloring if you want. You can also, when you pour it into here, you can pour it on top of shells or dried flowers or just dried decor in general. Or you can throw in some glitter or whatever to make it more jazzy. All right, after all your color is fully stirred in, you can go ahead and pour it into your mold. You can use just about anything you want. I do find that the wider the bowl is, or the more exposed that the air freshener is, the more scent you get out of it. So if you use a more shallow bowl that's wider, then you'll get more fragrance out of it than something that's a little bit smaller like this. But of course, something smaller like this is easier to display than a big old pan. So go ahead and pour this right into there. All right, so that's pretty much it for our air freshener. Our air freshener is finished. It's going to set up overnight, so I'm going to go ahead and transfer it over to where I want to display it. All right, after it's cool enough to handle, you want to go ahead and knead it for a little bit, making sure everything is nice and consistent, no air bubbles and all that. So what you can do is you can obviously roll out a piece if you wanted to, but what we're going to do is we're going to kind of marbleize it. Yes, before we get started. So take a little bit of the blue and the white, and just like if you were going to marble fond it, just kind of knead them together. And then if you need to, and I do, use a little cornstarch. To keep the dough from sticking to the table. And you want to roll it out to 1/4 inch thickness. You want them to be on the thicker side. Okay, wipe off the excess cornstarch. You also want to have your oven preheating to 175 degrees. All right, and now we're going to show you a couple ideas of what to do. Now, you could take a snowflake cutter, and then taking a smaller cutter, you can cut out the center. Just like in the 1, 2, 3 dough cookie episode. And now we have 2 ornaments to cut out. For the hole on top, I like to use an 800 straight tip, and we'll just poke a hole right on top. And what you want to do is you want to look around your house and find things to use as impressions. Now, of course, you can buy rubber stamps from the craft stores if you want, but just look around your house for things that you can use to leave an imprint on top of your dough. And of course, you can do this before or after you have them cut out on the dough. So you could put the impressions on the dough first and then cut out the shapes that you want. All right, so here are the ornaments out of the oven. When you finish cutting out your ornaments, go ahead and bake them in the oven at 150 to 175 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. Flip them over, and then let them bake for another 30 minutes. Now you can see, you guys know that my oven is a little bit off on temperature, and I don't actually have 150 degrees on my thermostat, so I had to kind of eyeball it. So you can see where it got a little bit dark on some of the ornaments, the first batch of ornaments that went through. So I just turned it down a little bit more, and the second batch came out much more pristine, much more clear, much more white. You can see too that the outlines got a lot more crisp from being in the oven. The writing would have been a little bit thicker. Just treat it like clay, like the clay class that you had in elementary school or whatnot. I really like the idea, and I feel like I want to give it another go and try to make a nicer looking one. So this was just basically a test run for me to get this done really quickly. This is probably one of my favorite ones, is the ornament that I used a little piece of mosaic tile to create like a Christmas wreath with the little indentations with it. So again, just look around your house and see what other kinds of imprints you can use. Have the kids go out and look around the house and make it like an activity, like a scavenger hunt kind of style, and see what they can find around the house that they can use to create the textures in their ornaments. Now, if you want to finish these ornaments off, go to your craft store and you can use watercolors or acrylics or just kind of craft paints that you can bake in the oven as well. Keep in mind that if you don't finish these off, don't paint them, or especially don't glaze them, they will eventually dry up and fall apart. So you won't be able to keep them for several years. So you want to go ahead and get a nice glaze from the craft store to finish them off. I'm not super crafty, so I'm not super worried about it. And even if you do lose these were a very inexpensive thing to do. Cornstarch is about $1, $2, and baking soda is less than $1 usually. All right, I hope I gave you some good ideas on different kinds of easy, simple crafts to do for the holidays. Handcrafted gifts are always very personal, very nice to receive, especially for grandparents and parents from their children. And of course, you can always do some baked goods with the various videos that you see on the Aubergine Chef. So this was part 3, and that's it for the holiday gift giving guide. I hope you guys learned a lot. I hope I was able to give you guys a lot of inspiration, a lot of good ideas for the holiday gift giving season. And I'll be back with a food blog post sometime this weekend. So thank you for watching, and remember, the Aubergine Chef, demystifying dessert one recipe at a time.